Aliens had studied humans for centuries, believing them to be a weak and predictable species. Their physiology was unimpressive, their technology primitive compared to the vast empires ruling the stars. The Zorcan Dominion, a warlike race known for their brutal conquest of lesser species, had little interest in Earth except for its resources. When they captured a lone human named Daniel Kane, they assumed he would be no different from the others they had encountered, simple, frail, and easy to break. They were wrong. Daniel sat in the cold steel cell of the Zorcan warship, his hands bound behind his back by energy restraints. The air smelled of metal and ozone, the artificial atmosphere humming with the steady pulse of alien machinery. A towering Zorcan warrior stepped inside the cell, his armored body glinting under the dim lights. He stared down at Daniel with reptilian eyes filled with contempt. "Human, you are now a prisoner of the Zorcan Dominion. You will tell us everything about your people and their military capabilities." Daniel lifted his head slowly, meeting the alien's gaze with an unreadable expression. He had been captured during a supply run, ambushed by Zorcan raiders who expected easy prey. But Daniel was no ordinary human. He had been trained for situations like this, forged in the secret depths of human experimentation projects that had been long hidden from the eyes of the galaxy. Enhanced reflexes, bioengineered muscles, and a mind that processed information faster than any known species. The Zorcan had made a mistake bringing him here. He remained silent, observing the warrior's posture, the subtle shift of his weight, the tension in his clawed fingers. The alien expected fear, submission. Instead, Daniel smiled. The Zorcan's nostrils flared with irritation. He reached down, grabbing Daniel by the throat and lifting him effortlessly off the ground. "Speak or you will suffer." Daniel's body tensed, but not in fear. His mind calculated the variables, the strength of the alien, the pressure points, the weak spots in the armor. His enhanced vision picked up the faint energy signature of the restraints, flickering for a millisecond each time the pulse cycled. That was his opening. With a sudden twist, Daniel shifted his weight, bringing his knee up and slamming it into the Zorcan's exposed ribs. The impact sent a shockwave through the alien's body, forcing him to release his grip. Before the warrior could react, Daniel twisted his wrists, precisely timing his movement with the energy pulse. The restraints flickered just long enough for him to dislocate his own thumb, slipping free of the bindings. The Zorcan roared in fury, swinging a clawed fist at Daniel's head. But he was already moving, ducking under the strike and driving his elbow into the warrior's throat. The alien stumbled backward, choking on his own breath. Daniel grabbed the warrior's fallen energy weapon and without hesitation fired a single shot between the Zorcan's eyes. The door to the cell burst open as more warriors rushed in, their weapons raised. Daniel moved like a ghost, slipping through the chaos with unnatural speed. He weaved between gunfire, his enhanced reflexes predicting each shot before it was fired. In the confined space of the warship's corridors, the Zorcan's sheer size worked against them. Daniel tore through them with brutal efficiency. He ripped weapons from their hands, turned their own blades against them, used the environment to his advantage. By the time the alarms blared through the ship, half a dozen warriors lay motionless on the cold floor. He paused only for a moment, taking in his surroundings. He had memorized the layout of the ship the moment he had been dragged aboard. The control room was 3 levels up, heavily guarded. The hangar was closer, but likely swarming with reinforcements. He needed another way. His enhanced ears picked up the sounds of approaching boots, the dull hum of energy shields activating. The Zorcan were adapting, recognizing him as more than just a standard human. They were beginning to see the real threat he posed. Good, Daniel thought. Let them come. With a final glance at the fallen warriors, he disappeared into the shadows of the ship, moving with the precision of a predator. The Zorcan had underestimated him, and they were about to pay the price. Daniel moved swiftly through the dimly lit corridors of the Zorcan warship, his enhanced senses picking up every detail. The ship was massive, a floating fortress of steel and death, but it had weaknesses. He had studied enough alien technology to understand the design flaws. The ventilation shafts were large enough for a human to move through, the security systems relied on biometric scans that he could bypass with the right tools. And most importantly, the Zorcan had never expected an escape attempt from a lone human. The alarm blared through the ship, a deep guttural sound that vibrated through the metal walls. Daniel could hear the distant shouting of Zorkan warriors, their heavy boots slamming against the ground as they searched for him. He moved with calculated precision, staying low to avoid security cameras, using the shadows to mask his presence. Ahead of him, two warriors stood guard at a junction, their plasma rifles raised, their reptilian eyes scanning for movement. They were large, armored from head to toe, their thick tails swaying slightly as they remained on high alert. Daniel didn't hesitate. He moved fast, launching himself forward before they could react. His first strike was brutal and efficient, a sharp kick to the back of one warrior's knee followed by a quick twist of the neck. The second warrior turned, his weapon already firing, but Daniel was faster. He dodged the energy blast, grabbed the rifle's barrel and redirected the shot into the alien's own chest. The Zorkan fell without a sound. Daniel exhaled, steadying his breathing. His heart rate was barely elevated, his body functioning at peak efficiency thanks to the genetic enhancements that had turned him into something more than human. He didn't know if there were others like him out there, but right now he was the only one these aliens had to worry about. He grabbed a wrist device from one of the fallen warriors, activating its interface. The alien text flickered before his eyes, symbols and patterns shifting as his neural implants quickly deciphered the language. Within seconds he had access to the ship's internal systems. He found the map he needed, pinpointed the engine room and set a path toward it. If he couldn't take control of the ship, he would make sure no one else could. Moving quickly, he weaved through the corridors, encountering resistance at every turn. The Zorkan were learning, adapting. They started using energy shields, moving in tighter formations. But Daniel was already ahead of them. He changed tactics, striking from unexpected angles, using the environment to his advantage. He set traps, hacked doors to seal off pursuit, used ventilation shafts to bypass heavily guarded areas. By the time he reached the engine room, the Zorkan were desperate. They had realized he wasn't just another prisoner but something far worse. They had underestimated him once, and now their warship was under siege from a single man. The entrance to the engine room was heavily fortified. 3 warriors stood guard along with an automated turret system scanning for threats. Daniel analyzed his options, calculated the angles, distances, and timing. He picked up a discarded energy grenade from a fallen soldier and with perfect accuracy threw it toward the guards. The explosion rocked the corridor, sending smoke and debris flying. Before the dust settled, Daniel was already moving. He closed the distance before the turret could lock onto him, sliding beneath its line of fire and disabling it with a precise shot to its power core. The remaining warriors barely had time to react before Daniel struck them down. He entered the engine room, his eyes scanning the massive core pulsing with raw energy. The ship's power systems were delicate, a precise overload could cripple the entire vessel. He moved to the main control panel, his fingers flying across the interface, overriding security protocols, disabling safety mechanisms. The door behind him slammed open. A squad of elite Zorkan warriors rushed in, their armor gleaming under the harsh lights. Their leader, a massive alien nearly twice Daniel's size, stepped forward, his voice a deep growl. "You are not like the others, human. What are you?" Daniel glanced at the countdown timer he had just activated. 5 minutes until core overload. He smiled. "I'm the reason you're losing this war." Then he vanished into the chaos. The ship trembled as alarms blared throughout the corridors. The core overload sequence had begun. Red emergency lights bathed the metallic walls in an ominous glow, while automated systems frantically tried to stabilize the failing power grid. But Daniel had made sure there was no stopping it. The Zorkan warship was dying, and they knew it. Daniel sprinted through the corridors, dodging panicked warriors who were too focused on the impending catastrophe to stop him. Some barked orders, others desperately attempted to reroute power to the core. It wouldn't matter. In 4 minutes the entire vessel would be nothing more than scattered debris drifting in the void. A squad of Zorkan elites blocked his path ahead. Unlike the panicked grunts, these were hardened warriors, their armor thicker, their weapons deadlier. They were not trying to save the ship. They were here to kill him. Daniel didn't slow down. His mind calculated the odds, his enhanced perception mapping out every possible scenario. The hallway was narrow, limiting their ability to maneuver. The emergency lights flickered, casting long shadows that he could use to his advantage. His weapons were nearly depleted, but that wouldn't stop him. The first warrior lunged forward, swinging a plasma blade in a wide arc meant to cut Daniel in half. He twisted at the last second, letting the blade pass inches from his ribs before delivering a crushing elbow to the warrior's throat. The Zorkan stumbled, choking on his own breath. The second warrior fired a rapid burst from his rifle. Daniel dodged sideways, catching the body of the first warrior as a shield. The plasma bolts tore through his ally's armor, giving Daniel the opening he needed. He grabbed the fallen warrior's sidearm and fired 2 precise shots into the second warrior's exposed neck. The third and fourth came at him together, their weapons glowing with charged energy. Daniel leaped forward before they could fire, using their own momentum against them. He slammed into one, sending him crashing into the other before finishing them both with a brutal strike to their skulls. 3 minutes. Daniel didn't stop to admire his work. He sprinted toward the hangar bay, the only viable escape route left. His neural implants tracked the layout of the ship, highlighting the fastest path forward. He could already hear the Zorkan attempting to lock down the exits, but he had been faster. He had already hacked the security systems before initiating the overload. The hangar doors were still open. As he reached the massive bay, his eyes locked onto a sleek Zorkan assault craft, one of their fastest short-range fighters. It was his only ticket out of here. But he wasn't alone. The hangar was swarming with warriors. Dozens of them positioned behind cover, weapons raised. The moment they saw him, they opened fire, plasma bolts scorching the air. Daniel dove behind a supply crate, narrowly avoiding the deadly barrage. He was running out of time. He grabbed a fallen grenade from a nearby corpse, primed it, and threw it with precision. The explosion sent a shockwave through the hangar, scattering warriors and sending debris flying. Using the chaos to his advantage, he sprinted toward the fighter, weaving between enemy fire, his body moving faster than the Zorkan could track. 2 warriors attempted to block the entrance of the craft, but Daniel was already upon them. He slammed one into the hull with bone-shattering force before snapping the other's neck in a single motion. 1 minute. Daniel leaped into the cockpit, overriding the controls and initiating launch protocols. The engines roared to life as the fighter hovered above the deck, its weapons systems activating automatically. The Zorkan warriors scrambled, trying to shoot him down, but it was too late. Daniel gripped the controls and punched the thrusters. The craft rocketed out of the hangar bay just as the warship's core reached critical mass. As he soared into the vast emptiness of space, he watched the Zorkan vessel erupt into a blinding explosion, fragments scattering in all directions. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. He had done it. He had just taken down an entire warship alone. But he wasn't done yet. This was only the beginning. The stolen Zorkan fighter tore through the vast expanse of space, its engines leaving behind a glowing trail of ionized particles. Daniel kept one hand on the controls, his eyes scanning the star map flickering on the ship's interface. He had escaped the warship, but he wasn't safe yet. The Dominion would not let this humiliation go unanswered. They would hunt him across the stars if they had to. The fighter's sensors pinged a warning. Multiple energy signatures were approaching fast. Daniel's enhanced mind processed the data in milliseconds. For Zorkan interceptors closing in at high velocity, their weapons systems already locking onto his ship. He didn't need to guess their orders. Shoot on sight, no survivors. He tightened his grip on the controls. He had never piloted a Zorkan ship before, but that didn't matter. His neural enhancements allowed him to process unfamiliar systems as if he had been trained on them for years. The moment the first plasma blast streaked past his cockpit, he reacted with inhuman precision. The fighter rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the attack before diving into a tight spiral. The Zorkan pilots pursued their ships, moving in flawless coordination. Their superior numbers and firepower should have made this an easy kill. They didn't realize they were fighting something they had never encountered before. Daniel flipped a switch on the controls, rerouting power to the forward weapons. His stolen craft had 2 plasma cannons and a missile payload. He had limited ammunition, but he wouldn't need much. The moment one of the interceptors came into his crosshairs, he fired a single missile. The projectile streaked forward, locking onto its target before detonating in a brilliant explosion. 1 down, 3 to go. The remaining ships adjusted their attack patterns, tightening their formation to cut off his escape routes. Daniel saw it coming before they executed the maneuver. They were trying to funnel him into a kill zone where their combined firepower would tear him apart. He let them think their plan was working, guiding his ship directly into the trap. At the last possible moment he killed his engines. The sudden deceleration caught the Zorkan off guard. Their ships shot past him, unable to correct in time. Daniel reignited his thrusters, spinning his fighter to face their exposed flanks. In a blur of motion he fired his plasma cannons, 2 perfectly placed shots striking the engines of the closest ship. It erupted into flames, spiraling out of control before vanishing into the void. 2 left. The remaining pilots adapted quickly, breaking apart to attack from opposite angles. 1 came from above, the other from below, forcing Daniel to choose. He didn't hesitate. Instead of dodging, he accelerated directly toward the incoming ship. The Zorkan pilot didn't expect it. His hesitation lasted only a fraction of a second, but that was all Daniel needed. He fired his last missile at point-blank range, then veered off at the last moment. The explosion consumed the enemy fighter, leaving behind nothing but debris. 1 left. The final interceptor pilot made a desperate move, switching to full assault mode, unleashing a relentless barrage of plasma fire. Daniel weaved through the onslaught, pushing the stolen craft to its limits. His reflexes were faster than any ordinary human, faster than any Zorkan could comprehend. In a final maneuver he feigned a roll to the right before cutting his engines once more. The Zorkan took the bait, rushing forward to deliver the killing blow. But Daniel had already adjusted his trajectory, spinning his ship and firing his plasma cannons in a single fluid motion. The last enemy ship erupted in a fiery explosion, its remains scattering across the void. Daniel exhaled, slowly checking his fuel reserves and ship diagnostics. The fighter was damaged but still operational. More would come. The Dominion would not stop until they had him in their grasp. But he wasn't running anymore. They had made a mistake, taking him prisoner. Now it was his turn to show them what humanity was truly capable of. His next move was clear. Find their next target. And destroy it. Daniel's mind raced as he zoomed out of the star map, locking onto a new target. The Zorkan had underestimated him, but he had just shown them the tip of the iceberg. Their initial mistake of capturing him would prove to be their greatest regret. The fight was far from over, and this time, he wasn't going to be the hunted. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the distant system on his display. The Zorkan had a hidden research facility on a moon orbiting a gas giant, and that facility had been working on weapon prototypes that could turn the tide of war. Daniel had to destroy it before the Dominion could use those weapons against humanity. The fighter's systems beeped an alert. Fuel reserves were low. The ship was too damaged for a prolonged fight. Daniel didn't have much time. He had to act fast. The facility was heavily guarded, and Zorkan patrols were constant in that sector. But Daniel had been preparing for this. With his enhanced mind, he quickly mapped out the best route to infiltrate the base without being detected. He couldn't afford a direct assault. Stealth was his only option. As he entered the system, Daniel's fighter slipped into the outermost orbit of the gas giant, using the planet's massive size to mask his approach. The gas giant's thick atmosphere would distort sensors, and the moon's orbit would put him in the perfect position to make his move. The research facility came into view, a sprawling structure built into the rocky surface of the moon. The Zorkan had made it almost impenetrable, with automated defense turrets, energy shields, and numerous patrols. But it wasn't the first time Daniel had faced an impossible mission. He approached the facility cautiously, lowering his fighter's profile and using every advantage the gas giant offered. The Zorkan patrol ships passed by, none the wiser that a lone human had slipped through their defenses. Daniel's heart beat steadily as he approached the facility, preparing to land on the far side where the sensors were weaker. He was almost there when an alarm went off, echoing through the facility. The Zorkan had detected an anomaly, him. They had caught on. But it was too late. He was already on the surface. He quickly ejected from the fighter, landing on the rocky terrain with a soft thud. His boots crunched against the dust and rock beneath him as he surveyed his surroundings. The research facility loomed ahead, guarded by automated turrets and heavily armed Zorkan soldiers. Daniel had anticipated this. He moved with lightning speed, diving behind a rock formation to avoid detection. His enhanced senses allowed him to track the guards' movements, noting their shifts, the timing of their patrols. He waited for the perfect moment. When it came, he sprinted across the barren ground, his body moving faster than the guards could react. He reached the first turret, disabling it with a swift strike that short-circuited its power core. The turret fell silent, and he moved on to the next. The Zorkan soldiers had begun to realize something was wrong. They were alert, scanning the area. But Daniel was already inside the facility, moving through the dark corridors with surgical precision. His enhanced vision allowed him to see through the darkness, and his mind was already planning his next move as he took down one guard after another, using their own weapons against them. He reached the heart of the facility, where the research labs were located. Inside, the Zorkan scientists were too focused on their work to notice the intruder. Daniel planted explosives along the key structures, research labs, energy cores, and weapon testing areas. He set the timers and moved toward the exit. But as he approached the door, a Zorkan commander appeared, flanked by a team of elite soldiers. The commander sneered, his deep voice carrying a sense of superiority. "You are persistent, human. But you will not leave here alive." Daniel smiled, his heart racing not with fear but anticipation. He wasn't going to fight them all. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. With a swift movement, he hit the detonator. The ground beneath him shook as explosions tore through the facility. The Zorkan commander's eyes widened in shock as the research complex erupted in flames. Daniel turned and ran, his enhanced body pushing him to the limit as he sprinted back toward the surface. Behind him, the facility crumbled, the weapon prototypes and all of their research going up in smoke. The Zorkan had lost their secret advantage. The moon shook as the facility disintegrated, and Daniel barely made it to his fighter before the shockwave hit. He launched himself into the sky just as the entire facility disappeared in a violent explosion. As he ascended into the void, Daniel glanced back at the moon. He had struck a blow against the Zorkan. But the war was far from over. The Dominion would send reinforcements, and they would never forget the human who had caused them so much destruction. He wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. Daniel's pulse thrummed in his ears as his fighter soared away from the moon's remains. The explosion was massive, the shockwave rippling through the nearby space, scattering debris and lighting up the darkness with the fireball of destruction. But as the smoke cleared, he knew it wasn't enough. The Zorkan would send everything they had after him. His mind raced, calculating his next move. The Zorkan weren't just going to let this go. Not after the loss of their research facility, not after their precious weapon prototypes were destroyed. But Daniel had already planned for this. He had made sure the destruction of the facility was only a small part of his greater strategy. The fighter's systems flickered, and a warning flashed across the console. Fuel reserves were critical. He had barely enough left to reach the nearest safe haven. It was time to make a pit stop. The nearest option was a neutral planet, a trading outpost on the edge of known space. It was a haven for smugglers and mercenaries, a place where Zorkan influence was weak. He set the coordinates and engaged the engines, his mind already moving ahead. The outpost was a risk, but it was also an opportunity. If he could refuel and gather supplies, he could keep running. Maybe he could even make some new allies. The Zorkan wouldn't find him here, not right away. The fighter broke through the atmosphere of the neutral planet, descending into the dusty expanse of its surface. The outpost was small, a series of makeshift structures surrounded by cargo crates and half-assembled ships. The air was thick with the smell of fuel and exhaust, the sound of engines and chatter echoing in every direction. Daniel landed his fighter in a secluded corner of the outpost, where the shadows of towering structures offered some protection. He had no intention of drawing attention. Stepping out of the cockpit, he scanned his surroundings, his senses alert for any signs of danger. The people here weren't enemies, at least, not yet. But in this part of the galaxy, trust was a rare commodity. He moved quickly, slipping into the crowded streets where mercenaries and traders bustled in the haze of dust. His eyes darted from one face to the next, always calculating, always searching for signs of potential allies, or threats. He needed information. He needed resources. After an hour of moving through the bustling market, Daniel found what he was looking for, a weapons dealer who specialized in high-grade military equipment. The man was human, older, grizzled, his face scarred from a lifetime of dealing in the underbelly of the galaxy. He gave Daniel a sharp look as he approached, recognizing the aura of someone who didn't belong in this part of space. "What's your business here, stranger?" the dealer asked, his voice low and gravelly. "I need supplies. Weapons. Ammo. Fuel," Daniel replied, his tone calm but firm. "And I'm willing to pay." The dealer eyed him suspiciously, but there was a flicker of interest in his eyes. "You look like you're running from something. Or someone. Zorkan?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. His presence, his posture, and the way he carried himself spoke volumes. The dealer didn't press. He had seen enough of those who ran from the Dominion. "I have what you need," the dealer said after a pause. "But it'll cost you. I don't deal in favors, not around here. Zorkan's too close, too many eyes." Daniel considered the offer. He didn't have much left in terms of credits, but he had something better. Information. He had overheard enough in the market to know that the Zorkan were building up forces in this sector, preparing for retaliation. "I can give you something worth more than credits," Daniel said, leaning in slightly, his voice low. "Intel. The Zorkan are about to launch a fleet operation in this sector. They'll be looking for a place to resupply. You can sell that to the right people." The dealer's eyes narrowed as he processed the offer. It wasn't a small piece of information. The Zorkan were notorious for keeping their operations secret. The dealer knew how valuable that intel could be to the right buyer. "What's the catch?" the dealer asked, clearly intrigued but cautious. "No catch," Daniel replied with a shrug. "Just a mutual exchange. You help me, I help you." The dealer paused, then nodded slowly. "All right. Deal. You've got yourself a package." After a few more minutes of negotiation, Daniel walked away with a small bundle of supplies, ammo, a few grenades, and a small stash of fuel. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him moving. The intel was worth far more, and the dealer would use it wisely. But as Daniel made his way back to his fighter, a flicker of movement caught his eye. From the corner of the market, a figure in dark clothes stepped into view. The figure's eyes locked onto Daniel's, and for a split second, Daniel saw something that made his blood run cold: recognition. Before he could react, the figure disappeared into the crowd. Someone knew who he was. Someone was tracking him. Daniel's heart raced, but he didn't let his fear show. He walked with purpose toward his fighter, his hands subtly shifting to the sidearm at his hip. It was time to go. The Zorkan had found him, or someone else had. Either way, the chase was far from over. He wasn't just running anymore. He was being hunted. But he had a plan, and as long as he had that, he would always be one step ahead. Daniel's grip tightened on the controls as he launched his fighter back into the air, the dusty surface of the planet falling away beneath him. The figure in the crowd had been too familiar, too intentional in their gaze. Someone had spotted him, and it wasn't a mere coincidence. The Zorkan were closing in. They had resources everywhere, and it wouldn't take long before they had eyes on every corner of space. But Daniel had grown accustomed to being hunted. Now, it was his turn to hunt back. He pushed the fighter through the atmosphere, his mind focused on the next phase of his plan. The Zorkan would expect him to flee, to run. But that was exactly what they wanted. He wasn't just a target, he was a weapon. His mind was his greatest asset, and with every move, he had one goal: to make them regret underestimating humanity. The Zorkan thought they had him on the ropes, but they couldn't have been more wrong. As the fighter tore through space, Daniel activated the hidden communications array embedded in the ship's system. It was an old frequency, one used by rebels and mercenaries, a secure channel that would only be picked up by those who needed to hear it. A voice crackled through the static. "This is Mad Jack," the voice said, rough but familiar. "You in trouble again, Daniel?" "Always am," Daniel replied with a smirk, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "I need a safe house, Jack. Zorkan's closing in, and they won't stop until I'm dead." "Thought you'd be dead by now." Mad Jack's voice was laced with a mixture of amusement and concern. "I'll get you the coordinates. But you know what this means, right? The whole damn fleet's looking for you now. You're a priority target. Might want to consider a new face." Daniel didn't need to be told twice. He already knew the stakes. If they were hunting him like this, the Zorkan would do everything in their power to ensure he didn't get away. And if they couldn't capture him alive, they'd just destroy everything in his path. "I've got a new plan, Jack. I'm taking the fight to them." There was a pause before the voice on the other end responded. "You crazy? You're already a walking target. You think taking on the whole damn fleet is gonna end well?" "I'll make it end my way," Daniel said, his jaw set with determination. "Give me the coordinates. I'll figure the rest out." Another pause, then a series of coordinates blinked onto the screen in front of him. Daniel committed them to memory, then cut the communication short. It was time to go to war. He rerouted the fighter's path to the coordinates Jack had provided. The destination was a neutral zone on the edge of known space, a place the Zorkan would never expect him to go. It was the last place they would look, and he intended to make it his final stand. As he drew closer to the coordinates, Daniel engaged his stealth systems, making sure his presence went undetected. He could already feel the tension mounting, the weight of what he was about to do pressing down on him. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about sending a message to the Zorkan, to everyone who thought humanity was weak. He landed on the designated world, a desolate desert planet barely on the charts. The few scattered settlements here were hidden away from the wider galaxy, and that's exactly why it was perfect. It was time for the final phase of his plan. The planet's surface was littered with old, abandoned structures, ideal for a guerrilla attack. He set his fighter down and made his way into the heart of the desert. As the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel connected with his underground allies, old contacts who had long since left the Empire behind. They had supplies, hidden caches of weapons, and intel on Zorkan patrols. Within hours, Daniel had gathered the last of his resources. A handful of fighters, mercenaries, and a few former soldiers who had been fighting the Zorkan for years. He had no illusions about how this was going to play out. He had to make every shot count. If they failed, it wouldn't just be his life on the line. It would be the lives of everyone fighting alongside him. The Zorkan fleet wasn't far behind. Daniel could feel them closing in, their ships prowling the sector, waiting for a sign, a slip-up. But what they didn't realize was that he was no longer running. He was leading them into a trap. The final battle came in the dead of night. The Zorkan fleet descended on the desert planet with precision, their ships cutting through the blackness of space like knives. But they were walking into a storm of their own making. The first wave of Zorkan forces was met with heavy fire from Daniel's forces, ambushes set up in the craggy valleys of the planet's surface. The battle raged, explosions lighting up the desert landscape as the ground shook beneath their feet. Daniel fought like a man possessed, his team cutting through the Zorkan forces one by one. But even as they made progress, Daniel knew the war was far from over. The Zorkan would adapt. They always did. But this time, they had underestimated humanity's will to survive. Daniel had proven them wrong. As the last of the Zorkan ships retreated into the void, their forces scattered, Daniel looked out over the battlefield. The desert was quiet once more, the fires of battle slowly dying out. He had won, but the victory wasn't for him. It was for everyone who had believed that humanity could stand against the darkness. He stood, breathing heavily, looking out at the stars. His fight wasn't over. Not yet. But he had sent a message. A message the galaxy would hear. Humanity wasn't just surviving anymore. They were rising.